Hi guys, my name is Alice, founder of the Aureus group, and welcome to our podcast today. Today we want to delve into more on leadership, but more in terms of interrogating most of the leadership advice that is actually given and is out there. And I'm sure most of us have been guilty of actually dishing out this leadership advice and packaging it so neatly, like it should be something for aesthetics. In real life, you realize that leadership is one of the most challenging, if not difficult, responsibilities anybody can have. Literally, it's nearly a burden on the shoulder. It definitely is a privilege. It definitely is opportunity for self-awareness, for self-growth, for self-actualization. But it's a really complex system to navigate. And today you want to just talk about that, the authenticity of what it means to lead, right? And sometimes you hear things like, oh, lead with empathy. Oh, be a good listener. Oh, grow your people. But sometimes some of this advice come without context. And today we're going to talk about some of the situations and also some of the realities of leadership in the corporate space. So to start us off, most leadership advice confuses leadership competence with virtue, because we kind of think that leadership is a character trait or a personality trait, that when somebody is in a position of leadership, then that becomes their personality. But that is far from it. Leadership is literally a mark of effectiveness. Because remember, leadership comes in place in businesses and organizations to drive results forward, to move businesses forward, to scale the heights of complexities of the VUCA world. So leadership really is measured in terms of effectiveness. And that's the first thing we need to understand. So the workplace does not need a leader to be amicable, to be, lovely, or to be strong, or any of those traits that we attribute to people and the personalities. The workplace requires leaders to be effective. And sometimes when we look at leaders, we fail to measure them on the effectiveness. So I remember a time when I challenged how leadership is measured in the company I worked for, because I found that it was quite weak actually. We were very good at having standards for performance, for the number, or for projects that were instrumental in unlocking performance, but we were very slow and apologetic on putting a benchmark to what a great leader is. So we had so many ineffective leaders in the organization because we didn't measure them, their effectiveness. We didn't think it was a challenge. But what happens is the erosion of good leadership happens over time. It's a silent erosion that happens through generations of leadership. And it's something that needs to be really looked at, because the effectiveness of a leader is measured by totally different things than what they really are as a person. And some of the things, if you think about effectiveness, somebody can be nice and cool and a great listener, but can they operate effectively under pressure? Can they lead a business through crisis? Because I witnessed so many moments where the leaders crumbled under pressure. Tough decisions needed to be made, and they were nowhere to be seen because they didn't have the courage, despite their niceness and despite their great leadership potential, the courage to make those decisions when it really mattered. The moments where the company relies on good judgment and discernment to make decisions. So again, you get to separate the person from what the job of a leader requires of them. Most organizations and most leadership conversations always ignore the context. Advice seem a bit one-sided on what a great leader should be. So, for example, be empathetic. For example, that's a very common one, by the way. But it sometimes ignores the context of the environment at that point, right? For example, if you're dealing with uncertainty at that point, then empathy has to be contextualized. You find that at that point, decisions sometimes are a bit Machiavellian to rescue the situation, right? And it doesn't mean that the person is not empathetic anymore. It means that they're able to apply wisdom in context of what is happening in the company at that particular time. Another one really is around delegating. It's a very common piece of advice. Delegate more. Free your time up for more strategic things. I had that so many times in my time in corporate. But it depends. Who are you delegating to? Where is the maturity of the team? Where are they at really for you to delegate? What are you delegating as well? By you delegating, are you making the team weaker? By you delegating, are you just passing on what is not attractive to do? So context matters even for things like delegation. We need to also be more all-rounded in understanding how to navigate that space. The third thing that I found most interesting actually, and I was just talking to one of the people I mentored the other day, and it's around some of the leadership advice we get are so soft on power dynamics in organizations, because I think this is one of the most uncomfortable topics in corporates. Literally, people want to pretend or to shy away from discussing the power dynamics in corporations. What we forget is that a corporation is a system. This system is man-made, and man is prone to so many things: ego, instability, life itself. So sometimes decisions made in the corporate space will look very flawed to you as the employee, but you're forgetting that it is all bound by a system that was created to deliver a certain outcome. And these are some of the conversations we don't talk to leaders about. So we find them having difficulties navigating political situations within their workplace. Because ideally, most systems are built on political nuances, whether spoken or unspoken. There are those rules that are written in white and black, but there are those rules that are unwritten. And most of the times, if you look keenly as a leader, if you are a discerning leader, you find that the unwritten rules in the corporate space are what really run the business. Those are the things that you should be learning as you navigate the leadership space. So it goes without saying that strong leaders must understand who really makes decisions in the workplace. Because they normally say there are meetings behind the meetings. So you get into a meeting and you find that people are making decisions very quickly. No, they're already made way before. The meeting you're having now is just to confirm decisions that have already been made. Are you aware of that? That is power at play at corporates. It doesn't look like something devious or cheeky. It actually looked like soft power dynamics. Some of the leaders don't even understand how visibility really works in the corporate space. And that is still part of the power play within corporate. We talk about navigating the workspace in terms of the work you do and the value of the organization. How do you stay visible? If you think about multinationals, for example, these are huge conglomerates with thousands of workers who are probably all mostly just working. So for you to be outstanding as a leader, you need to understand how visibility frameworks work within the workspace. This has to be discussed more. I did touch on empathy earlier, but what I've also discovered is that most leadership advice over-romanticizes empathy, right? And they put empathy at the top shelf of what leadership is. Is empathy important? Yes, it is. And it's actually one of the key principles of emotional intelligence. One of them. You think about a leader who is able to absorb emotions of the entire workforce, but is not able to make difficult decisions. I spoke about this earlier. So what's good is empathy if you're not able to translate the business strategy into actionable output for the organization. So over-romanticizing empathy is a very slippery slope for any leader. I think it's really around learning how to command yourself as well. And that's why EI becomes your navigator in totality, which empathy is only one piece of this. In a previous podcast, I was talking about how much EI has been misunderstood. and how most leaders associate it with warmth and, and all these beautiful words we like to express. However, at the back of EI is a leader who is able to take a hard stand on principle, who is able to navigate tough conversations with their own employee, who is able to actually make decisions based on what they believe to be true, despite what the organization is actually claiming to be true. Because we all know, like I spoke about, businesses can be political, right? But if you have an employee who is able, or a leader who is able to act on principle, that is somebody who is very high on EI, but also not just leaning onto the empathy card so that they can either seem admirable or inspiring and all that. That is not effective to the organization. Most leadership advice as well underestimates the impact of self-mastery in leadership, because most leaders think the work starts once you get that title, but ideally, self-mastery begins way back, even before the roles become available, even before you've reached the level of managing people. Why do I say this? Things like self-mastery involve things like knowing yourself, and at any given point in your career, you're able to make the decisions to reset yourself, define your purpose within the organization and your own purpose, and what's going to be your North Star for leadership as you get there. Mastering EI, a topic that at the Aureus group we've overemphasized on, which is actually the foundation of self-mastery. But this is important because by the time you're getting there, you are much more prepared to deal with people from all walks of life, of different personalities, of different ambitions, without projecting your own personal insecurities, failures, or ego to them. Because you've already mastered self and your own confidence, you're able to command your own voice in boardrooms, you're able to speak your mind, you're able to stand ground on what you believe is true, you are able to confidently go after ambitious targets because you know what you're made of. So self-mastery starts way before the leadership roles appear. But this is something that most young, let's say graduate or emerging leaders wait too long to start working on. Most of them start thinking about this when the roles are open posted for strategy roles or for leadership roles. But by that time, it's too late. You're not even a candidate because you've not been exhibiting all these traits already. You've not been. So the idea is to start as early as you can. As early as you enter the organization is to start understanding yourself and your placement within the organization. And as you define where you want to move in the next few years within that organization, is to start mastering your own journey much early. I always used to tell people I used to lead, how do you expect to lead people in the future if you cannot lead yourself? How do you expect them to deliver deadlines if you're not beating your own deadlines? How do you expect them to bring discipline to the team when you yourself are super indisciplined? Like, what exactly are you prepping yourself for in the future? And that's all goes back to self-mastery. So as you aim for leadership roles, you start anchoring yourself on virtues and qualities that you expect your team to exhibit or to emulate in future. Otherwise, the road to leadership becomes extremely bumpy. Most leadership advice pretends that leadership is about being popular. When I entered corporate, and I remember the HR lady saying this, girls and boys, this is not high school. This is not a popularity show. This is the real world. This is application. And this is where you make or break yourself. And indeed, her words were very true for me, because you realize that in your growth journey as you go ahead, you find that there'll be so many moments whereby being respected is more important than being popular, than being liked, right? And sometimes saying no is actually the answer to unlocking long-term results for the organization. But these are things that have to be worked on, because you realize that they don't come easy. Saying no is not popular. Taking a stand that is not very common is not popular, because as human beings, we are really wired to go with the flow. We want to do what the majority is doing. But what's ironic, part of the interview questions that are asked in some of these corporates is something like, tell me a time when you took a stand for something unpopular. Now, this is the ironic part. You enter the corporate world, but the moment you take a stand for something unpopular, or you kind of be seen as this rebel, like this rebel who doesn't fit in. And yet, these are the things that really, in the long term, makes a true leader, right? And these are the things that you need to start thinking about as you navigate leadership, because there will be so many moments whereby things just look ridiculous. They don't make sense. But because people want to look right, they want to sound right, they want to please a certain executive, they're going to go with those decisions. But then at the end of the day, at the long term, remember, you join the business with a purpose. That becomes diluted the more you lose yourself to become this yes person who stops thinking for themselves, who stops taking responsibility, who stops being comfortable with hard conversations, and who stops even protecting their teams from influences from other executives that are damaging the team in the long term. So then what does better leadership advice look like? And I did some my own research, and I found this very useful nuggets that I think might also help you to navigate and to also balance the leadership advice that you get out there for the reality of what the corporate space look like. Not for you to feel good about yourself, but for you to prepare for the realities, right? So be empathetic, but do not let empathy erase standards. Be authentic, but not unfiltered. Empower people, but not beyond their readiness. Listen carefully, but do not confuse input with decision rights. Develop your team, but do not build dependence. Stay humble, but do not shrink your authority. Build trust, but do not avoid necessary conflict. Think strategically, but remain close enough to reality to act effectively. Protect culture. But remember, culture without performance becomes sentiment. And lastly, master your emotions, because instability at the top multiplies below. And I think that's all we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, stay tuned for more leadership conversations shaping the continent by the Aureus Group. Thank you.